Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the Heat Check Hangout Conference Tournament Preview Series. We are previewing the top 7 conferences in college basketball. Lucky number 7, just so that we could include the ACC for our co-host Riley Davis's benefit. For this episode, we're going to be previewing the SEC, and we have a special guest, Jim Root of the Three Man Weave. He is the host of the Field of 68's Best Bets. Thanks for joining us, Jim.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, for the people, I'm a Mizzou grad, so I'm definitely dialed into the SEC. I've watched every Mizzou SEC game this year, which begats a lot of other SEC teams. So hopefully I'm qualified to give you some generally intelligent observations, but we'll find out.
Yeah, well, we'll start right there. Looking at the bracket, the SEC tournament tips off Wednesday, March 8th. The first game is between Brian's, South Carolina, and Ole Miss at 6 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday. So that would be, if I'm doing math correctly, 7 p.m. Eastern. But I think the biggest thing on the bracket that stuck out to me is that Jim's Missouri is the 4 seed over a 5 seed Tennessee. So they get the bye straight to the quarterfinals, while the Volunteers have to play in that second round game against the winner of South Carolina and Ole Miss. What else stands out to you as particularly interesting about this bracket, Jim?
Dennis Gates Coach of the Year, much? Maybe? I don't know. Buzz Williams and Jerry Stackhouse probably in that mix as well. Maybe even Nate Oates, but we'll see. Yeah, I mean, I'm a little surprised that Mizzou has the double bye. And honestly, given where they were, I don't know, a month ago, the fact that Kentucky's sitting there at the 3 seed and actually looking pretty good. They got a huge win this weekend without Case and Wallace. They've had so many injuries, like in and out of the lineup. I think you could go all the way to say John Calipari did a good job this year, which is maybe not what people were thinking about 2 months ago when they wanted to run him out of town. The other interesting thing to me is Vanderbilt, their spot. They're going to have to beat a team in Georgia or LSU that would qualify as a bad loss. But then if they can get Kentucky, get to the semis, they're going to make it really interesting for the NCAA tournament committee because they've gotten closer and closer to the bubble. Their net is not good, but the resume actually is pretty good. And I kind of want to see the Commodores get all the way to the dance.
The bracket
Brian,
sets up well. I was going to say the bracket sets up well for Vandy, too. They lost to LSU a couple weeks ago, I think it was. And that kind of took a lot of the NCAA tournament wind out of their sails. But get that win. Kentucky dealing with some injuries. A little flawed. Vandy did just beat them. A&M's a gettable team if you're looking ahead to the semis. Both of those qualify as good wins. I think if you're Vandy, avoiding Bama, avoiding the juggernaut that is Mizzou, in your path to the tournament finals, like that, I think it sets up well for them. And they're playing as well as anybody in the SEC right now, maybe outside of Alabama. That's a team that I think could really throw a wrench into things.
Yeah, Vandy's actually shooting the ball, which is really rare in this league. That was kind of my big presentation or discussion point I wanted to talk with you guys is, do we think this league's in trouble in March because no one can shoot? And tangentially related to that, is that why Texas A&M has actually been good in the league? Because they play so compact defensively, and they're like, we dare you to make threes, and no one in this conference can do it. And so that makes me think there's a chance we see some serious underperformance from the SEC in the postseason. My colleague Matt has been beating the drum that this league stinks for a while. And he might be right. So I'm gonna wait and see. But I do think there's something there with the fact that nobody can really shoot. It's literally 32nd of the conferences in 3-point percentage. So I think there's potentially an issue there for the league.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Texas A&M does it by, they have I think a top 5 free throw attempt rate, if I'm not mistaken, in the country, and they are, I think by far, maybe a percentage or two, the best free throw shooting team in the conference. So they shoot decently. I mean, okay, 32% from 3, but they get it done at the line, and that's kind of what wins you games in tight ones sometimes. So I wanted to talk about Alabama. We're not going to talk about everything that's happened off the court, just on the court. They obviously have had a pretty rough last few weeks. They lost on the road to Tennessee. They did have the big blowout over Georgia, but then they got taken to overtime by South Carolina. They only beat Arkansas by 3 at home. They got taken to overtime by Auburn, and they lost on the road against Texas A&M. So a rough probably two plus weeks of basketball for a team that many thought was the top team in the country. Riley, how vulnerable, maybe not just even in this tournament, but further than that, how vulnerable do you think Alabama really is? Let's focus on the SEC tournament, in the first couple of rounds.
Sorry, did you say how vulnerable is Alabama in the SEC tournament or beyond in the NCAAs?
Yes. Well, both, but start with the SEC tournament.
Oh, man. It clearly seems like the off-the-court incidents are hanging over this program, just with them getting handled at A&M and just how down they got to an Auburn team that they annihilated on the road earlier in the season. That being said, it's still tough for me to, early on going against Florida or Mississippi State, I know even though Mississippi State has that tough defense, I like their chance against both of those teams because neither of those teams can really score, and I think just it's a tall task having to stop all of Brandon Miller and Mark Sears. Jaden Bradley can give you some buckets. Rylan Griffin has been coming off the bench pretty strong for them as well. I just think they're able to manufacture easy looks at the rim too effortlessly to be tripped up early. I don't necessarily think that they're going to win this conference championship, but it will tell us, are they able to shake off some of the I hate to use the word distractions because someone got murdered, but for lack of a better word, the off the court incidents, the off the court distractions.
Let's talk about Mississippi State for a second, Brian. They're sitting squarely on the bubble. If you look at bracket matrix, I think they're right on the right side of the bubble, one of the last 4 teams in. As Riley said, one of the toughest defenses in the country. They're outside the top 150 in offensive efficiency this season with, I believe, one of the 5 worst three-point shooting percentages in the country. Talk about can't shoot, Mississippi.
The worst. They're horrific.
So, as Riley said, what do you give if they get past Florida? What do you give their chances against an Alabama team, considering they might have more to play for in that game than Alabama does at this point in the season?
Well, they played Alabama tight in their matchup this season. I think it was a 3-point game. This is just the key to beat Alabama in general, is limit Bama's shooting from 3 and force a lot of turnovers. Mississippi State's defense does that. The question then becomes, can they score enough points? Because obviously that's the whole point of playing basketball, is scoring more points than the other team. But can the offense be efficient enough to keep pace and not drag things down? Really reward the defensive effort. I think if they beat Bama, they're in. That's going to be a big enough win to push them over the hump, especially considering, at least at this point, what other bubble teams around the country have done leading up to conference tournament time. Sorry, Riley. I don't think they'll get it done because that offense is atrocious. But Bama is vulnerable. They kind of play in to the way Mississippi State wants to play anyway, that grinded out style. It would be an ugly game, but I'm not writing it off as out of the realm of possibility.
Jim, what about you?
Yeah, I think that's weirdly a tough matchup for Alabama. I mean, their issues lately have been not making threes. They did not make any threes against A&M. They were 5 for 28 in the previous matchup with Mississippi State. Their defense gives them a high floor, but Mississippi State's right there too. So it feels like it'll be a rock fight. You get on a neutral floor, these tournaments tend to slow down. It's not always the case, but Alabama's very comfortable scoring in transition. They like to get quick baskets, and it's going to be really, really tough, against Mississippi State and just in the postseason. I kind of think Mississippi State is going to at least compete there and maybe not actually get the win because they're just not enough offensive firepower late in the game. They don't have a creator I have an ounce of trust for, but they're such a high floor team because the defense is always there.
So moving further down the bracket, let's assume, because Tennessee has played one sub 100 Ken Pom team to within 10 points, and that was a 4-point road win against Ole Miss. Let's assume Tennessee plays Missouri in that quarterfinal game. Sorry, Brian.
You're not
what
gonna.
are you
You're not gonna
expect-
give us a. You're not gonna give South Carolina a shot, considering Tennessee has beat the Gamecocks by 40 both times they played.
No. I'll give you 30 because they're without Zakai Ziegler.
Done. That's fine.
What would you expect from that matchup, Jim, between your Missouri Tigers and Tennessee?
That's the interesting clash because no one makes threes against Tennessee, or at least they didn't for a really long time. And Mizzou is actually the best three-point shooting team in the league, and they shot the lights out in Knoxville, the one win they had. They're 14 for 26 from deep, including the ridiculous buzzer beater to win. Tennessee's strange because I think everybody's kind of dumping them because of no Zakai Ziegler, and that's somewhat fair. I was kind of out on them before, even when they still had him. The on-off numbers don't paint him as like some monumental, like terrible loss. Like should be survivable. They defend better without him because they're bigger and more switchable. But like if you had offensive concerns before, who's creating shots late in the shot clock? They're still going to beat Mizzou up on the glass in that game, like absolutely demolish them. They did in the first meeting. They had 47% of their misses they got on the offensive glass. Mizzou's a terrible defensive rebounding team. But I kind of think Mizzou might nip them there because of the outside shooting and Tennessee's relatively low offensive ceiling at this stage.
Yeah, I
Riley,
like that
you
Mizzou-
are the champion of this podcast for all things bad offense. You're a fan of UNC. You championed Iowa State in our Big 12 tournament preview. What are your expectations for Tennessee in this matchup?
Yeah, I was gonna say that I like where Jim's coming from with that. I would pick Mizzou in this game if they play Tennessee. I think Mizzou, they rank 194th in defensive efficiency in the country. However, in conference play, they still finished 10th in the SEC. There was 4 teams that were worse than them defensively. Did I count right there? Yeah, 4 teams. And I think Tennessee, without Ziegler, they just don't have the shot creation to really make that defense pay. And, I mean, I've enjoyed watching this Mizzou team all year long with the shots they take, the ball movement they have. After watching a team all year, like you hinted at, that's pretty offensively challenged. It's so refreshing to see to where I think, especially you take away Ziegler, who is that sort of dynamic point of attack defender, could throw the defense a little bit out of a loop. I mean, they just gave up 79 points to an Auburn team who no one is really like thinking is going to be one of those elite offensive teams that, you know, your typical Bruce Pearl Auburn team. So I like Mizzou's chances in that game.
The one second round game that I think is going to be one that everyone wants to watch. Maybe not because it's going to be the prettiest game, but there's a lot of intrigue there. Auburn just probably saved themselves from the bubble by beating Tennessee. Arkansas, obviously, preseason top 10. They have not hit that stereotypical Eric Musselman Arkansas February swing that they've hit the last couple of years. That matchup to me is probably the top matchup in that second round before you hit the quarters to watch. Brian, what are you expecting in that matchup? Because I know both teams have really struggled this year to get those top wins outside of that Tennessee win for Auburn, where we were expecting, I think, quite a bit from both teams preseason.
A sloppy game, a lot of turnovers, fast pace, a lot of wild passes thrown out of bounds. It's the way both those teams play. I'm interested to see Arkansas, though, because I keep waiting for that time where, you know, Nick Smith is back, he's gotten up to speed, and now things click, and now things go. I keep waiting for that to happen. It hasn't yet. And same kind of deal with Auburn, where, you know, we know how up and down their guards are and have been throughout their college careers, really, and this season's been more down than up. Keep waiting for them to kind of flip it back in the direction, at least for a little bit, right? And so I think that matchup in the backcourt in this game is going to be key because the opportunity is there for a run. We talked about nobody really being good in this league. The winner faces A&M, who, while certainly good in SEC play, has some terrible losses on their resume, which is why they weren't really an anti-tournament lock until a couple weeks ago. A win could be had there. If a backcourt is able to get right, if Nick Smith takes off and Arkansas starts taking off, Auburn's guards, Katie Johnson and Wendell Green, turn things around and we start seeing the highs of them rather than the lows that we've seen more often than not this year, Auburn could take off. And I think if that happens, either of them become dangerous teams, not just at the SEC tournament, but potentially the NCAA tournament as well. That's going to be the big key to watch for me.
Jim, are you still holding your breath for an Arkansas turnaround? I know we've always seen them struggle in February, but we haven't, or January, but we haven't really seen them struggle this late in February yet. Should fans be expecting something heading into the postseason, or are we kind of seeing what they are?
I'm waving a white flag. I surrender on Arkansas. I kept waiting for it. I added some futures money to them in February when Smith was back and looking sharp. But they just gave up 1.25 points per possession to a team with no point guards. Like, how does that happen against Kentucky? That was a really disturbing thing. It wasn't like Kentucky just made a ton of threes. They made 4. It was the defense got punked inside. The offense still has issues with having no shooters. What do you know? An SEC team that you can just zone and not really worry much about because they can't beat you with that. So I think this is just what they are. I mean, maybe you get like a 30-point Nick Smith performance in this tournament or the big dance that gets them a win. But I think they're very schemable against. Like, you can prepare to beat this team, and they don't really have any recourse if you pack it in. So I'm kind of, like I said, giving up on hope that they actually surge forward.
Riley, the bottom of the bracket, Vanderbilt's going to face the winner of Georgia and LSU. Similar to the question with Tennessee, I just don't think – I mean, Georgia might give them issues, but I just don't think Vanderbilt's going to lose that game. You've got Vandy against Kentucky, which I think is a pretty intriguing matchup because, again, no one expected Vandy to be this good. And as far back as, as recently as mid-January, I don't think anyone expected Kentucky to finish in the top 3 in the conference. So what are you expecting from that kind of branch of the bracket heading into the quarterfinals?
Yeah, I think Vandy would kind of be my dark horse pick just with how they've been playing recently. Part of that, I think, is my heart wanting to pick that. It's like, I'll remove my Asheville sticker and say I'll cheer for one UNC alum here with Stackhouse getting the Commodores to the dance. Again, like, you look at how they're playing recently, where they've won 8 of their last 9 games. Although, if you're making that case, though, you can't conveniently gloss over the fact that their one loss is to just an awful LSU team. But like has been said, with their shooting, that gives them a chance against a lot of these teams that don't have the shooters to keep up with. I think Stackhouse has run some legitimately fantastic plays after timeouts that will give them a chance in any sort of close game. However, it's still a dark horse pick for a reason because I can't really see them beating Kentucky 2 times in a row. Especially getting that win in Rupp Arena, you got to think like any sort of emotional lift that Kentucky would need, it has after losing to this team on their home court. And the way that Kentucky has played recently, I mean, they have the athletes to sort of exploit Vanderbilt with Toppin and Sheboy, of course, and some of it I think comes down to Cason Wallace's health, like Jim said, with him missing the last game. If he's healthy, I think they probably handle Vanderbilt pretty easily the second time around.
We'll jump into that. Brian, speaking of dark horses, and let's consider a dark horse anyone below 5, because I don't know how many people are going to consider Tennessee a dark horse to win this tournament. 6 and below, what team do you have the most confidence in to make a potential run to the finals in the SEC tournament?
Vandy, and I kind of hinted at it earlier. The way they've been playing recently, I mentioned it. I think they're playing as well as anybody in the SEC right now outside of Alabama. They had that loss to LSU, yes, but they're a better team, have been throughout the entire season, even before this hot stretch. They've beat Kentucky recently, right, who would be ahead of them. So they have already proven victories over teams that they would play. They're shooting the ball much better. They're playing with much more effort. Liam Robinson's injury could play a factor in that, though. He's out for, I think, the rest of the season. And that's a blow inside for a Vandy team that already didn't have a ton of margin for error. They're a candidate, but I'm also going to go with Arkansas. I don't know if there is the real possibility for any one of these lower seeds to take off. So if I'm going to pick one, considering Robinson's injury, I'm going to go with Arkansas and just, I know Jim's waving the white flag, that's probably the smart thing to do, but I'm going to just say, well, maybe Nick Smith turns it on and this group kind of takes off. So that's where I would bet, but I would not be surprised if we saw chalk hold in the later rounds.
And Jim, do you think any of these dark horses has a shot?
I'm gonna go Mississippi State. It feels gross because every time I look at their KenPom page, the brightest red light of their 3-point percentage is glaring back at me. But I think the defense is solid. I don't trust Florida without Castleton, so I think they can get by through that game. And then Alabama's just been not Alabama lately. I'm the betting guy, so they have 4 straight games without covering the spread. They have been underperforming expectations recently. And that first game was close enough that I think they can hang around, make that a rock fight, and suddenly they're in the semifinals, and they're like, wait a second, how did the Bulldogs get here? But it's just like in a league with no shooting, I'll be okay with the team with the best defense. And on most nights, they have the best defense.
Okay, so we end this preview with every preview with a championship pick and your bold prediction. I'm going to start with Brian. Who do you have winning the SEC tournament, and what is your bold prediction?
It's not fun to pick Bama, but I'm going to pick Bama. Every team in this bracket is flawed, and Bama is flawed. I talked about their reliance on three-point shooting and their tendency to turn the ball over. I think those things will bite them in the NCAA tournament. I think they're going to be okay in the SEC tournament. They're going to have a couple tight games. I think Mississippi State could give them a run. Mizzou could certainly give them a run, but they're the most consistent and the most able to overcome a bad game. So I would go with them. Bold prediction is that I think we see Arkansas play them in the title game. I'm not a believer in A&M still. Kentucky, I would love to see another Kentucky-Arkansas game. That game was very emotionally charged over the weekend at Bud Walton Arena, and I think that got the best of Arkansas. And so I think neutral court, another crack at them. I could see Arkansas making a run to the title game, but Bama, to me, takes it home.
Riley?
Yeah, for championship, I'm actually going to go with A&M. Give a little pushback to Brian saying he still doesn't believe in them. I don't know. I might have missed when you discussed them earlier, but the fact that this team is third in the country in free throw rate, and they have not one, not two, but 3 guys who rank in the top 11 in free throw rate individually in the SEC, in Wade Taylor, Tyrese Radford, and Henry Coleman. I like that a lot because I feel like that's the kind of offense that's going to travel. They're going to draw fouls even when shots aren't falling, and that can be the difference between winning and losing, is being able to convert some of those easy points at the line. Tyrese Radford is also just someone who I've really enjoyed his game since his days at Virginia Tech. I think he's listed at 6'2", but rebounds like he's 6'8", so he's someone who I kind of like the redemption arc storyline there. So give me A&M getting it done. And for as far as a bold prediction goes, I'm going to say Mizzou is who A&M beats in the championship. I like Kobe Brown to drop a 30-piece somewhere in there, whether that's going to be against Tennessee in the quarterfinals or Alabama in the semifinals.
Jim?
Love that. I'm going Kentucky to win, but this is very contingent on Case and Wallace playing. I know they had a big win without him over the weekend, but I think they need him to hit the ceiling that they're capable of. And I guess related to that, then my bold prediction will be I think I talked myself into Mississippi State making a run. So I'll say Kentucky over Mississippi State in the final. People start talking if Alabama should be knocked off the one line because they lost in the quarterfinals, yada, yada. They lost 2 straight to end the year. But, yeah, I'll ride with Big Blue Nation, the surge that they're on. And Mississippi State, welcome to the tournament.
And I'm going to go with Kentucky as well, presuming that Kason Wallace is available to play. I just think they've been playing some of the best basketball over the last month. Like Jim said, we have to start talking about the coaching that Calipari has done over the last month and a half. My bold prediction is I think Antonio Reeves wins the MVP of this tournament. I think his three-point shooting is going to be invaluable, especially in a conference like this where three-point shooting is hard to come by. That's going to do it for us for the SEC tournament preview. For my co-hosts, Brian Ralph and Riley Davis, I'm Connor Hope. Thanks to Jim Root for joining us to talk some SEC hoops.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to talk my Tigers and everything else in this lovely conference, the SEC.
Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.